I did not expect Aninews to drop a video on Sentenced to be Hero, but here it is. We're here, so we gonna check it out.
Episode 1 honestly felt like a...
The title of the video is Sentenced to be Hero Episode 1 Cut Content. What did the anime change and the lore you missed?
Episode 1 honestly felt like a movie, with quality animation all the way through and a world that had me captivated right from the get-go. I can already tell you we're gonna be in for a treat this season. Still, even with Episode 1's impressive 1-hour runtime, lots of lore from the covered chapters were left out. Details ranging from how long humanity has been fighting the Blight, all the way to what goddesses are and how their abilities work.
Yeah, I was not expecting
The
it to be
anime
an hour
also
long.
changes up the events of the story a bit, rearranging when and how Xylo makes his pact with Teorita. This in turn leaves out an entire fight, but not in a bad way like how you might think. In fact, the changes in the anime might even be better. So,
That was tight. Look. So I thought it was a little bit lackluster, just a little bit, because her ability reminded me of Gilgamesh. If you watched the Fate Stay series, it reminded me of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was one of my favorite characters, but it just looked like a Gilgamesh, copycat. But seeing that big sword,
story, or
that was
just
cool.
see what's different between the anime and the novel, this video will cover all of that. Support Retreat from Covenge Forest, covering the prologue and report of said incident from Volume 1 of the light novel. The prologue is brief yet impactful, starting with...
They also changed, like, her outfit, I saw, which is, I think it was a good touch. It was a good change. Like, she looks 12, bro. So I'm all with the change. Put her some clothes. She's on a battlefield. Like, why is she wearing that?
What it means to be sentenced as a hero. We already know it's considered a fate worse than death, but what that initial excerpt doesn't share is that there is a way out. As unlikely as it is to achieve, by killing every last demon lord and stopping the spread of the Blight, it was possible for a hero to gain amnesty. To even think such a feat was possible in the first place though, well, that was a fantasy only a fool would cling to.
Is that what that means? All those markings on his neck, is that like every demon lord he's killed?
The fate
That's
of a
tight.
hero
That's
could
cold,
very well
bro. He
last
got
for
his, he
100
marking them
years
bodies like what was it? He's marking them like Black Panther, Killmonger.
and onward. Nothing would release them from their punishment except total victory. This brings us now to our first hero, Dota, a criminal guilty of treason and a world-class prodigy at petty theft. Before being sentenced to be a hero, he'd apparently been involved in over 1,000 cases of burglary, one of which even resulted in him stealing one of the royal family's dragons. Naturally, you'd think such a feat was impressive, but when you find out the dragon had eaten one of Dota's arms in the process, you start to see just how crazy Dota really is. Only a madman or someone obsessed with thievery would try to steal a dragon. Dota just happened to be both. He was currently alongside Xylo, working in the battlefield that was the Covenge Forest. Said forest was in the northern part of the Federated Kingdom, the last nation left to all of humanity. That said, even now as heroes and holy knights were fighting to defend it, humanity was on the verge of losing even this place. That's why Dota was so worried, since he was well aware they were about to fight a demon lord and its army of 5,000. They didn't even have the option not to, since as criminals serving time as heroes, the sacred seals imprinted onto their necks made sure of it. You see,
Okay, never mind. It's seals. I thought it was bodies. I thought it was demon lord bodies.
Or try to escape or fail the mission given to them, then those seals would torture them to death and lead to their subsequent resurrection. A quick extra bit of info about resurrection is that in addition to losing one's memories and sense of self, how well the resurrection goes depends on the condition of the body too. This is because revival was apparently the process of dragging their spirits out of hell and driving them back into their flesh, so the better the corpse's condition, the more precise the resurrection. That said, the people responsible for these resurrections weren't afraid to use someone else's body. Even if gluing random bits of pieces together increased the chance of failure, so long as all the necessary parts were present, revival would still be attempted anyway. It's why some heroes are eventually reduced to mindless walking corpses. So, regardless of whether your heart stopped or your head was blown off, perpetual resurrection ensured heroes would complete their mission no matter what. Now, we know their mission
is a crazy concept though. Like if you're a villain or you were a criminal, you can't die. Like, you don't even get that honor. Like, that's torture.
Time was to support the troops in their retreat, so that was given to Penal Hero Unit 9004 alone. Normally, there would be a lot more heroes within the unit, but with everyone else out for resurrection or busy with another mission, that left only Xylo and Dota. They did have their commander Venetim too, but he was for the most part useless. Luckily, this time he had come in handy, since if not for his quick-thinking negotiation skills, the conditions for success would have been defeating the Demon Lord outright. Instead, Venetim had talked it down to simply getting the majority of the Holy Knights to safety. This was only possible due to his past as a con artist and political criminal, so despite being a coward with no leadership and fighting ability, he was incredibly skilled at deception. The same unfortunately couldn't be said for Dota, since when it came time to explain himself about the coffin, there was no reason other than pure impulse. Dota was a true kleptomaniac through and through. Anything that could be stolen would be stolen, and the more useless it was, the more he wanted it. Like, for the coffin in particular, he didn't know he was taking a dead body until he was already stealing it. Now, perhaps it was morbid curiosity that had Xylo open it, but whatever it was, what he found inside was one of mankind's last hopes. A lifeform created for war using the wisdom of the ancients.
Like, that's insane. Him being able to steal a nuclear warhead is what she is, pretty much. Like, a reusable nuclear warhead. A walking one at that. The fact that he could steal something like that is like, what kind of security they got going on in that place? Like, damn, I feel like you could just walk straight into the headquarters then at that point.
May think saying last hope was an exaggeration, but for Xylo, he was well aware goddesses were the strongest weapons humanity had against the demon lords. That said, with only 12 goddesses existing in total and the Holy Knights being the organization meant to protect and use them, the fact Dota had managed to steal one just confirmed how skilled of a thief he was. If not for his circumstances, he very well could have gone down as the greatest thief in history. Dota's description of goddesses wasn't inaccurate either, as not all of them had a female body. They were just called goddesses for the sake of convenience. With all being these super weapons created in the ancient times though, some took on bizarre forms that were incomprehensible to humans. Either way, the goddesses and their origins were far beyond Xylo's understanding. Everything I just said was all he could confidently recount about them. It was then that Xylo would get himself ready to fight the Blight, taking with him the only possession not stripped from him when he was sentenced. This would be his sacred seals meant for battle, markings that went by the name of Super Multi-Purpose Belcore Mobility Thunderstroke Seal Compound.
That's so long. What? Super Multi-Purpose Bellicure Mobility Thunderstroke Seal Compound. They couldn't have made that shorter. That sounds like the title of a Rebirth anime, you know what I'm saying? Like, To Another World. Like, I used to be a 9-to-5 40-year-old loser. Now I'm reborn into another world at 99, level 99 everything. Like, that's literally the title of a TV show. I'm pretty sure that's an actual real title.
Now, unlike how Xylo left the goddess and the coffin where it was, in the novel he would order Dota to carry it. This has her entrance come from her coffin rather than the confident strut from the forest, but both depict the goddess the way that she was meant to be. A confident go-getter eager to receive praise. Every goddess did have their own unique personality, but what they all had in common was their proud demeanor and a strong desire for approval. They were prideful warriors who sought battle and the commendations to come after it. This one in particular was different though, as just as Xylo noted, she was the never-activated 13th goddess. Now, before we get to Xylo saving that detachment of Holy Knights that were getting massacred, there was first a bit of history given about how humanity...
He needed to join the NFL. He was probably, if he didn't go into a life of crime, he probably could have been an NFL quarterback. He would have had 10 rings, bro.
Even ended up here. I imagine some of this might be mentioned in a future episode, but just in case it doesn't, you should know the fight between mankind and the Demon Blight has been occurring sporadically. All throughout history, the Demon Blight would come in waves. Right now, humanity was fighting in what's officially called the Fourth War of Subjugation, an outbreak of Demon Blight that first started 20 years ago. The very first war dates all the way back to ancient times, but for now, this one started in a newly developing mountain region far to the west. As the story goes, a giant snake had been spotted warping the trees and transforming the wildlife, even turning those that were bitten by it into monsters. All these reports were dismissed by those who heard it though, since with the Third War of Subjugation having ended 400 years ago, many didn't believe something like this was possible. To them, the demon blight was a fairy tale only told by storytellers. This resulted in humanity being late to react, giving the Holy Knights no time to take action. In the end, they were—
So, you're telling me the upper brass ignored the claim that there was a blight going on and like another demon lord was coming out? They're like, nah. They didn't even investigate it. They just went, nah. And they're just sipping on like their wine and eating their their charcuterie boards. Like, bro, they literally got everybody killed. Like, that's what I don't like. Oh my God. The idiots at the top that are just so comfy, they don't pay for none of that. They don't pay the price at all. It's everybody else on the bottom.
were forced to destroy the entire mountain with a scorched terrain seal. Still, such an act was too little too late, and the demon blight had already spread far beyond the mountains. So that was how humanity lost half their habitat, and it's how they now find themselves here.
Lost
This
half
brings
their
us
habitat.
back to Xylo, who, after seeing a detachment of 200 Holy Knights get massacred down to 20, was on his way to help as fast.
To be honest, that sounds more like depopulation. They probably, them higher ups thought like, we got too many people in this town. We gotta cut the population down a little bit.
As he could. Doing so meant navigating between the predatory fairies, mutated wildlife that looked like manifestations of each creature's nightmare. It's here that Xylo would be joined by Dota, both using their skills to traverse the forest effectively. Xylo would use the sacred seal on his palm to imbue power
Them
into his
impact
blade,
frames
while
was
Dota would
clean.
utilize his sixth sense to determine where most of the monsters were. You see, despite Dota's fear making him a coward, it also made him incredibly sensitive to the presence of other living creatures. This made him incredibly useful, as he could easily tell where exactly the distance between himself and any other target was. It was a skill that went beyond
So
just
he could be like an
decent
archer
eyesight.
too.
Now, Xylo's demeanor towards the goddess was a lot less blunt, as in the novel he was actively trying to turn Teorita down nicely. He didn't just straight up tell her he didn't want her, he instead tried to use her own pride against her, saying how powers like hers shouldn't be used for such a small task. It was before he could say anything else that Xylo would engage the first fairy
They
just
made
like how
him
we
seem
saw in the anime.
disgusted with her.
For a bit more context on what he did, the blast on impact wasn't from the knife, but rather the sacred seal on his palm. He had plenty more sacred seals that he used to be able to utilize, but after becoming a hero, only 2 remained usable. There was the seal of heat and light, formerly known as Zate Finde, and the seal of flight called Sakura. Zate Finde simply meant big candy, and for Holy Knights it was a cutting-edge tool used to battle the demon blight. It allowed those that possessed it to transmit the seal's power into an object and transform them into a tool of destruction. The level of destruction was dependent on the amount of power transmitted into the tool, the full extent of which we've yet to see so far. You see, while Xylo was certainly capable of turning an entire
Crazy
house to
strong.
ash, a lot of his blasts were lowered to the size of a carriage, likely to mitigate the amount of friendly fire that might occur. When it came to Dota's weapon, this was a staff that had a sacred seal carved into it. Created by the Verkal Development Corporation, the seal they imbued allowed the wielder to unleash bolts of lightning difficult to dodge and even harder to defend against. So it was with this and Xylo that the 2 were able to wipe out the fairies, saving only 10 Holy Knights by the end of it.
Like sometimes whenever they were shooting off those projectiles, they looked so slow moving. But whenever he saved his life there, that thing looked like a rocket.
It was as we saw after that their help was only met with disgust. This made Xylo ready to leave them behind and use them as a decoy, but that's when Teorita would step in to suggest otherwise. She wanted to use her powers to fend off the next wave, but knowing that doing so meant they couldn't turn back, Xylo would instead do all he could to salvage this barely fixable situation. for some reason, he felt he was still able to return Teorita back to the Holy Knights in secret. That was until Venetim informed them the Holy Knights were moving forward instead of retreating, fully jeopardizing the mission the heroes were tasked with. Not only that, something about this whole situation just didn't seem right. The Holy Knights
she was not listening at
through
all.
and through, and it was from them that he knew just how routine it was to sacrifice heroes while they retreated. The fact they weren't doing that now, though, indicated a miscommunication or clear disobedience. Turns out it was the latter, as their captain had no intent of ever retreating. The thing is, with their trump card with Xylo and not on the front lines, their chances of victory were pretty much zero. Such was an outcome Xylo was more than aware of, leading him to make a pact with Teorita right here out of nowhere. That's right, it's here in the novel that events start to happen a little bit different. Rather than have that whole battle and make the pact when the situation seemed dire, Xylo instead commits to it before. He was much more open to the pact than he was in the anime, as he knew it was the only way to save both the Holy Knights and himself. With the goddess's powers only usable after a pact was made, Xylo knew that despite essentially deceiving the goddess, it was the only option him or anyone else had here. He knew he had to set aside the fact the goddess was entering a pact with someone she didn't even know. So, after exchanging an oath and offering part of himself as evidence of their agreement, the pact would be made and remain until one of them died. What exactly did this pact do? Well, it created a bond that connected all the way to the depths of Xylo's heart. It was a feeling that made him think he'd regained a part of himself he'd lost and forgotten. Now, it was at this point that a bit more lore would be given on the goddesses themselves, starting with how they first appeared during the Great Civilized Era at the time of the First War of Subjugation. It was for thousands of years since then that they would always reawaken when the demon blight arose, only returning to their coffins once their duty was fulfilled. While this lengthy slumber would cause them to lose their memories, the fact remained that they would always return for one single purpose: to defend the world and all of its inhabitants. Now, each goddess
so whenever there's like a demon lord around, they just wake back up?
According to the temple, made them a kind of gateway. The nature of each goddess's summons was different, so one would be capable of manifesting natural phenomena like lightning or storms, while another could bring forth humans. There was supposedly one that could even summon visions of the future. There were no instructions on how to activate these abilities, but once a pact was made, the Holy Knight with which it was made with would instinctively know exactly what their goddess was capable of. So as soon as Xylo made his pact with Teorita, he immediately understood the countless blades she could summon. Whether they be famous, cursed, treasured, or holy, any and all swords could be summoned based on Xylo's desire. It was for this situation in particular
Gilgamesh. They just turn into Gilgamesh, bruh.
Sharing a mental picture of what he was thinking. This was a property unique to those who made a pact, since the connection they shared went beyond just intent and volition. The knowledge they now shared allowed them to instantly know exactly what the other wanted and what their next moves in battle could be. It was a synchronized partnership that excelled with those well versed in war and military strategy. This is what made Goddesses humanity's trump card, and it's the reason Xylo knew that he could win with her. Naturally, the knights who saw this were distraught, as a hero making a pact with a goddess was unthinkable. Xylo had no choice though, as the knights around him were far too weak to fight with the goddess. At the very least, if he ended up dying, he'd just be revived. The same couldn't be said for any of the other knights. Now, this brings us to an entire fight we didn't get to see in the anime, since before Xylo could make it over to Kivia and her army, he first needed to defeat the second wave of fairies coming for this weakened detachment. This is why Xylo wanted a fence, as with Teorita's powers he knew she could easily make one. It was when she did that the swords that dropped would also kill half the fairies in the process, instantly making the rest of Xylo's job easier. All he had to do was throw some swords and detonate them beyond the fence. Immediately, the fairies saw that they were outmatched, so in a surprising turn of events, they would actually flee. Just like that, Xylo had ended—
I always thought that they were like brainless, like they didn't have no type of conscience to even decide to retreat, but they just showed one of them toads sweating.
the second wave and saved everyone. I would say Dota helped too, but during the entire fight, he didn't hit anyone. His excuse was that he didn't like hurting people, but it was a well-known fact that he's killed people on burglaries before. So this was just Dota saying anything he could. As for Teorita, more than anything, she wanted praise for a job well done. This was what goddesses valued more than anything else, and humans did well to take advantage of that. Such intent didn't really matter to the goddess though, as without that praise, they couldn't survive. This brings us back in sync with the anime now, right when Venetim calls to tell them to move to the next battlefield. Aside from all the panic of the mission being at risk of failure, a majority of his words couldn't be trusted. Reason being that Venetim spoke lies as naturally as he breathed. He was a clever con man that used his skills to get on people's favorable side. He had even once convinced the royal family to sell their castle to the circus, but it was in the middle of doing so that he was finally caught. So even if the entire unit was in a dire emergency, if Venetim said he was gonna help, it was 9 times out of 10 an act. Xylo knew he would just spew lies so as to not get in trouble with the correctional officer overseeing him. Fortunately, he was able to provide the main army's location, but not at the ready like a good commander would. So this was the experience that came when dealing with Venetim. It was after that Xylo would send the Holy Knights he saved back to their camp.
That sucks though. It's like you have a commanding officer that is a compulsive liar. Like, what if you wanted some extra detail? Like, what if you wanted to ask him, like, is the battlefield clear for me to infiltrate and then set up shop, you know what I'm saying, before the next wave? And he's like, if I tell him no, he probably won't go. So yeah, it's good.
How we
It's
saw
like,
in
bro,
the anime, then
I could have done a
fully
different
committed to
plan. I
taking
could
out the demon
have. Why
lord.
you gotta lie?
The only difference between any of this was the fact that he already had the power of the goddess with him. Committing to do so without it would be suicide. Xylo also had the bad habit of hating being underestimated, so if there ever was a situation where someone could look down on him, usually he would do everything in his power to prevent that. It's an additional reason for wanting to prove these Holy Knights wrong. He wanted to show them he wasn't what they thought he was. This brings us now to the fight with the main army, but that's the second half of episode 1 I'll cover in the next video. I'll be continuing this series every Saturday come episode 2, so be sure to subscribe to catch all of them. And don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this one. But anyway,
y'all check out the video. Check out
time.
the original video by Aninews. Check out the original. Right here. Aninews. Subscribe, like.